We knew that the story about the base order of rules was partially false.
We knew that the international order was, in part, false, he claims. A series of comments that clearly have a message directed straight at Trump. And that's because, according to the Prime Minister of Canada and also the former governor of the Bank of England, who was also in charge of the Bank of Canada, he participated in the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, issuing a direct warning about the current state of the global order led by the United States. American hegemony has provided global public goods, says Carney, including open sea routes, a stable financial system, and collective security. However, he warns that this system of cooperation and global stability no longer works. It no longer works, he says. He stresses we're in a rupture, not just a simple transition. According to what the Canadian Prime Minister says, the great powers are beginning to use economic integration as a weapon. He knows best about that. I mean, he comes from the financial system, he has been part of the financial system, and he understands how it has worked and how it works now. Different means that the tools of trade are no longer used for prosperity, but only as a geopolitical instrument. It's a tool of power that's being used, and not just by the United States, but now it's also being used by China. Today we're going to talk about what the President of France, Macron, says, as well as what Donald Trump says, that there's no turning back now. All his comments, especially Trump's, caused the markets to fall. Let's check the markets, and the dollars drop, which caused significant reaction. We have to remember that Europe, China, and Japan have a weapon over the United States. And if they ever use that weapon, they could cause an unprecedented economic crisis in the United States. There are advantages to having your currency be the world's currency, the most widely used currency on the planet, which is still the dollar to this day. There are advantages to it, but there are also big disadvantages, really huge ones. What if a country suddenly says, I don't want dollars anymore, here, take them back? That would crash your economy because suddenly there's an oversupply of dollars and the dollar drops. Just as it's a strength and gives you power for your currency to be the one everyone uses, it also becomes your greatest weakness. What happens if, according to what Garnier says, the great powers are starting to use economic integration as a weapon? Which means these are trade tools that no longer aim for everyone to prosper. They're no longer about competition, but about exerting pressure. Given events in the United States, China, the European Union, and the Global South, Garnier notes they are entering an era of competition for spheres and economic influence. Something that was already expected back then, when things like Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa started happening, and this and that. Well, this rupture is starting to have effects. Donald Trump is leading it in that sense. We'll discuss what Donald Trump is saying, then talk about Macron. It's a matter of observing what's happening in this ongoing decline. The S&P 500 represents the 500 most significant and strongest companies in the United States. When those 500 companies experience a drop, first an economic gap, a drop gap, let's say, from the previous day. Impressive, not big. And then besides that, gold goes up, obviously as a safe haven. They don't go to gold, but then you see the dollar against the euro, a tremendous drop in the dollar. Look, just well, is this interesting what Donald Trump says about Greenland? Let's get into the details, but he says there's no turning back now. Greenland will be taken. Let's get into the details. But with this statement, President Trump confirms his intention to annex Greenland. The American president also accuses the United Kingdom of committing a great act of stupidity. I'll explain why. Let's talk. What does he mean by why? He suddenly called the United Kingdom stupid, right? Well, let's get into the details. What happened there? And for that, we have to look at the map. We have to look at the map to understand this situation in this region. Let's see if you can spot it, since it's a very small island. Here it is. Just look at the size. It's a bit complicated, but here's the famous Diego Garcia, right? These super small little islands, right? Well, they show, let's see if I'm here or not. I'm here. It's just that it's too small. Here it is. I found it. Here are those little islands of Diego Garcia. Well, now they're going to show up. Let's go to the base that the United Kingdom has there, which the United States uses. By the way, it's going to become part of Mauritius, of a country that's over there, a tiny country that's over there. I'm sure they're reporting right now. Donald Trump is complaining at this moment. What are they doing? The Chagos Archipelago to the islands of Mauritius, which are these islands where the United Kingdom is going to hand over these islands to Mauritius. And Donald Trump says, without any sense, without any logic, right? I mean, at least from his point of view, right? He says, if they're not taking it, why are you giving it away? Donald Trump accuses the United Kingdom of geostrategic weakness and stupidity. He says this is yet another reason to acquire Greenland, taking it even further away from NATO. Well, European countries are obviously paying attention to this issue, as is NATO itself and Canada as well. But surely someone else is also watching all of this closely. Let's see where they stand. Mauritius. Look, here is Mauritius. It's really far away. And here are these islands. They're several thousand kilometers apart. Just look, Mauritius is here. And these are the islands we're talking about. See how far apart they are. We're talking about an easy 2,000 kilometers, maybe more than 1,000 for sure. We'd have to check. Let's take a look, right? Yeah, easily it's about 2,500 kilometers. So, since the United Kingdom hands it over, obviously the bases will still be there, but will they be operating in that area? European countries are clearly responding to this situation. Vice President J.D. Vance called the European reaction exaggerated because, J.D. Vance expected less from us. Well, Bondalai. Also, the President of the European Commission warns from Davos that the world order has simply changed and that Europe must adapt to this new order. The same Macron also sends a message. Let's see what Macron says in this situation. He's wearing glasses because of an eye problem. Didn't you see his very red eye in recent photos? He looks better with glasses now, right? Macron essentially said the same thing. He added, "The era of rules no longer exists. Right now, there are basically no rules, at least in the international order. This is simply a huge issue." At the World Economic Forum in Davos, the President of France launched harsh criticism at the powers for troubling practices that weaken the global economy. Emmanuel Macron spoke at the 56th Annual Summit of the World Economic Forum held in Switzerland. During the speech, he launched a direct criticism at both China and the United States, describing their actions as concerning. Macron stated, "We are destroying the structures that allow us to solve situations." Referring to the economic and international political order, he pointed out that collective governance is being displaced by fierce and relentless competition between powers. He accused the United States of demanding maximum concessions and of trying to weaken and subordinate Europe, which represents a threat to European sovereignty. He also denounced the United States' attempt to accumulate new territories, which can obviously be interpreted as a reference to the issue of Greenland. He also brought up China, criticizing excess industrial capital in major sectors. For these exemptions made by the government which make competition with China impossible. Basically, China is taking over the market in many areas like technology, energy, and others, right? He says China uses distorted practices with the goal of saturating the global market in certain areas and destabilizing economic sectors in other countries. This allows them to control the whole sector. That's also his complaint with China, and it's true this situation was previously warned about. Macron also advocates for shared governance instead of the current model of opposing blocs, and he calls for restructuring the global rules of trade and power. Well, that's how the day started today. with harsh messages directed at certain powers, specifically the United States and China, and, well, even harsher messages to come. Not verbally, but in this message coming from the European Parliament. In Brussels, Danish European Parliament member Anderson Wiesen sends this message to Donald Trump. Let's listen. It's a serious issue.
Thank you. A message from Donald Anderson. Justice message.
A message from, let's see.
Put this in words you might understand.
Let me put things in. Let me say a message, let's say, or put it in words you can understand. He calls Donald Trump Mr.
President, fuck off.
He says, Mr. President, fuck off. That's the message. Not just no, but fuck off. That's why I'm sending this message.
That's how words died. A year ago, in this same room, I clearly said they'll interrupt you there.
Trump?
Sorry, colleague, but the rules stand regardless of how you or the rule feel.
And they interrupt him and say, well, in the meantime, yes. Regardless of whether you have strong feelings against something or someone, you still have to maintain good manners. Let's say, no, basically he tells him, and among them, they specifically tell him not to say certain bad words. There's another one like that. I don't know if it's the president of the parliament or who this person is, but Anders Vistisen, a member of the European Parliament from Denmark, sends him the message, basically telling him to move aside. Well, that's how the reaction was in that sense. So what do you think? What do you think about this situation? There's really no turning back. Is that our only choice? A world and an era without rules, not of law but of the strongest, which, as Carney rightly says, well, no, it didn't work perfectly, right? There were clearly many lies within this order, but now we face total chaos. Not the law of the strongest, just chaos. And well, in the face of this, what we've already seen the fall, here we're seeing the fall of the dollar. I mean, we see it. This is regarding the price itself, which is already very, 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 very low. It's really fallen, let's not deny it. This drop, where do you see it coming from? I mean, it has fallen, it has fallen, it has fallen, and it has fallen, and it keeps falling, and there's another drop coming. This is about the dollar, which has dropped significantly against the euro. Meanwhile, the main safe haven is gold, and gold is going up. All-time high, and it's still rising, right? Just days ago, we were at around 4,640. I think that was the last peak. Exit 4,758, getting closer and closer to $5,000, that is, per ounce of gold. Impressive, impressive. And well, if we look at the S&P 500, there hasn't been a huge drop either. I mean, from yesterday or from the weekend, let's say, to today. Today, Tuesday, the drop is already 2% or 2 point something percent. A drop like that from the 15 strongest United States companies. Yes, it shows there's a problem and another issue. Another issue is that the price of oil is also rising. I mean, it bounced off this line. It made a new floor there. That's not what's happening here. Starting from these two lines, there's a new ceiling and floor. It seems that this price, where it stayed for a while, is no longer going to hold, but will tend to go up. Trump doesn't like that either, since he wanted oil at $50 per barrel, but it's already nearing 60. Well, it's at 60 right now, it's already at 60, it's $60 at this moment. That's how things are. Let's move on to other important topics. A military contingent from Denmark arrives in Greenland, which includes, by the way, the head of that country's army. So, there are already movements happening at another level. We won't go into the details of what is known about this military movement that Greenland is making. But do we know if this plane landed? The United States and Canada also apparently will be sending forces to the United States base in Fit-Fit-Pitufik on the Arctic island in a coordinated deployment with Denmark. The military plane was carrying 60 soldiers from the Danish armed forces who reportedly arrived at Kangerlussuaq Airport, which is in western Greenland. The head of the army, Peter Boysen, was there as well, according to reports. So while they send this mission, or let's say this plane with Danish soldiers to Greenland, and well, reports say maneuvers by 7 NATO countries, including Denmark, will continue amid tensions. Despite the pause and Germany's apparent return, Danish troops were still deployed that way. And, well, obviously these are tensions being experienced right now, even though they say it's just an exercise. It's clearly not just because of Trump and Greenland, right? Meanwhile, another issue that draws attention is that the president of the European Commission is already sending a message saying that the measures Trump is taking are disproportionate. And she brings up several points that I think also increase the attention or the focus. In any case, the escalation coming from the United States had already been warned about a few months ago. But now, seen directly in the forum, von der Leyen herself delivers this message in which she says the following about the issue of annexing Greenland. The announcement made by Leyen in Switzerland states that the Arctic island is an autonomous territory of Denmark, and that imposing tariff measures on European countries over this issue makes no sense. Von der Leyen assures that getting caught in a downward spiral would only help adversaries. She delivers the following message regarding annexation. Greenland asserts that the island is an autonomous territory of Denmark and that the imposition of European tariffs over the issue doesn't make sense, Bondar assures. Would being caught in one aid adversaries? In politics, just like in business, a deal is a deal. When friends shake hands, it should mean something, says Bondar. Law in the face of this situation. Well, there are also parts of their messages. By the way, among these topics, there's also an issue we've been discussing here about the solar storm that has occurred in the last few hours. And well, there are some interesting reports. The impact is already visible, including a double storm, a G4, and an S4. The satellite navigation electrical systems may have experienced failures, especially in the northern part where there were auroras borealis. The United States National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration also raised the warning. A category, G4, is associated with risks to stability. Besides, it wasn't just a G4, it was a G4 that almost jumped to G5. I mean, it was a very powerful G4. Besides the radioactive part, which is S4, that's also coming in very strong, and it's the strongest solar storm since 2003, so, well, that's also important. In parallel with the G4 geomagnetic storm, a solar radiation storm classified as S4 out of 5 has been arriving. The Space Weather Prediction Center of the National Weather Service monitored the phenomenon in real time and has been communicating its magnitude through its official channels. And, well, we've been talking here about these technological risks, even giving warnings for people who live at the poles or in high areas near the poles. The increase in radiation associated with this severe solar storm poses a particular challenge for activities that depend on near space. Astronauts, for example, in Earth's orbit, can experience negative effects. Obviously, in this situation, well, that's what I'm saying. Those who just returned from the space station must be really happy because they were sick, so, well, they were lucky to come back in time, let's say. Let's move on to other important matters. Glasses. Well, Donald Trump sent a message to Macron because Macron said he doesn't think we're going to be part of this, let's say, peace council in Gaza because of the guests he had, because of the little conversation he had with Israel. Come on. They didn't like the way Trump is handling it, and simply, well, they're not going to be part of this. Meanwhile, the United Arab Emirates, according to other countries, were supposedly invited, and even the United Arab Emirates has already accepted Trump's invitation to join the Peace Council. France says it doesn't want to be part of that, and Donald Trump doesn't want to either. In the end, it's an invitation, and it's an invitation to a peace council in another country. I mean, France or whichever countries can make whatever decision they want. Trump responded, "Oh, they're not joining, then the peace council won't join either. I'm going to put 200% tariffs on wine, champagne, and all that in the United States." Trump is going wild with tariffs and doing whatever he wants. And well, he's making enemies with all the countries over issues that have nothing to do with France. That's it. They just oppose him and he gets really intense. So obviously, well, that's also going to happen. I think it's very important when it comes to negotiating about Eurolandia. Also, well, it's striking that it's involved in all these tug-of-wars. Today, Donald Trump shared private messages with Macron and Maron. I already showed and passed them along to you earlier. Private messages that are now public. And, well, they also show how they really talk to each other, although they speak quite politely, at least on the part of Macron and Maron. I don't know about Trump, but within this, what draws attention? Some comments that will also be important are that Emmanuel Macron offered to organize a G7 summit in Paris. And well, the fact that Trump mixes or makes private messages public also draws attention. It's a topic that, well, yes, it sounds funny and it sounds, but sooner or later that could backfire because they could also publish images or texts of him, in which, by the way, he says that he could invite the Syrians, the Russians and the Ukrainians to that G7 meeting to try to talk about all the conflicts that have been happening lately. But, well, it's a point that would be interesting to watch and see if it happens. In the meantime, let's go to the comments. How have you been? How are you doing? Thank you so much for joining us for this little while. Let's quickly go to the comments. It's a very busy day, especially because while all this is happening, there's something that's imminent. There's a situation happening that's almost like an internal revolution in Iran. A lot of things are happening in Iran. We'll talk about that in a bit, but anyway, let's pay attention to the conclusions from the Davos meeting, at least today's, and also this whole situation, right? Thank you very much. How are you, Lily? Greetings, Carlos Martinez. Thanks for your comments and greetings to the community. Thank you, Lily, and everyone who liked. Thank you to everyone who supports us with a super chat or by joining the channel. Thank you, Jose Dominguez. How have you been? Hello, Eliseo. How are you? Good evening, Magical Luna. It's already night for you, isn't it? Here, it's almost 1 p.m., right? On this side, but for those in Spain, good evening. This one went all out. Another one really went for it. He went all in. I mean, it got intense there. Between what the member of the European Parliament said to him, what McCartney says to him, and what Macron says, we're already entering the no-rules phase, which is very interesting. Hello, Ada Iso. Thanks for your Twitter post. Miguel, how are you? Greetings, Kudex, right? This one comes from the United States, says J.M.S. Grill, says Adilcia. Greetings to Panama. Very good. What's up? Who else is out there? Greetings, Israel El Omeli. Miguel Edgar Carlos de Ye. Victor, very good greetings, he says. Is Donald Trump going to have it in front, says Victor. Aurelio, how have you been, he says. Freedom of speech, says Aurelio. How have you been, Aurelio? A big greeting also to Nicole and Franco. How have you been? Europe hasn't arrived, says Guillermo. My respects to Trump, but his arrogance doesn't get him anywhere or lead him to a good place, he says. Carlos, how are you, Carlos? Very good. Who's out there? Well, to the whole community, thank you very much, Jose, Francisco, Carlos, Leonardo, Lily. A big greeting to the whole community. See you in a little while. We continue with what's happening in Iran and with other important topics as well.